Welcome to In the Arena, a show where entrepreneurs and leaders take us behind the headlines and into the biggest crises of their careers and lives and how they made it to the other side. I'm Jessie Janae, a startup founder and your host. You've probably heard of OKCupid, Tinder, Hinge, Plenty of Fish. What they all have in common aside from helping people meet is that they're all owned by Match Group. Today on In the Arena, we have Sam Yagan, co-founder of OKCupid and ultimately CEO of Match Group through its rapid growth and IPO. Sam's trajectory from startup founder to CEO of a public company is remarkable. He helps demystify M&A by giving raw details about OKCupid's acquisition.
Because now it's starting to dawn on me, wait a minute. I was like, wait, that's all it took to get a term sheet? If we had signed that deal on that Friday, it would have been like negligent on my part to have not. I would have had to fire myself.
And gives us a lens on co-founder relationships through the extreme ups and downs of that process.
We had a meeting in January because we were all like, okay, this isn't working. And we had an offsite at our lawyer's office. Note to listeners, do not have offsites at your lawyer's office.
Never heard of that.
No, terrible idea.
It sounds supremely unfun. For me, it was Sam's honesty about the fact that a single phone call or meeting can dramatically change a company's fate that really struck me. And of course, the stories that go along with those revelations are pretty memorable too.
I took a call with Greg when he said words that are infamous to my co-founders. He was so mad at me. He said, "I can't see. I have flames in my eyelids."
I'm joined today by co-host Ryan Caldbeck, who founded CircleUp and is tech Twitter famous for opening up about founder mental health.
Was anything running to your head about, this guy just screamed at me for an hour? What is the premium that I need to be paid to go work for this guy?
Let's jump in. All right, so Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
You were the co-founder, CEO of OKCupid. We all know that you go on to get acquired by Match and you have a significant role there. But we want to drop in right before that reality that we know occurs becomes real. We want to start right before you make the decision to actually sell OKCupid. There's a day, and you know much more about this day than us, where you're about to sign a term sheet to sell your company, to be acquired. Can you help us bring that day to life? Selling a company is just a huge deal, and we're going to dissect that more. But what's going on in your life that day? Where are you? What are you thinking about when you're about to sign that term sheet for OKCupid?
We're in November of 2010. OKCupid is based in Manhattan. I'm living in Chicago at this time, commuting back and forth. This was, pre Zoom days when you didn't have to, geography didn't matter. Very much mattered. And, selling a company, one of the many things about selling a company is it's something you just don't do very often in your life. And yet it's very high stakes. And so I had the good fortune of selling a company called SparkNotes prior to this, but this was still only the second time I had ever been involved in selling a company. And we can later get into why we were even trying to sell the company. But I had been running a process on behalf of my co-founders and the company to try to get acquired. And if you go back to the online dating industry back in 2010, really Match is the company, is the 800-pound gorilla. It's the highest profile company that you want. The only other real companies around at that time are eHarmony, which was a private company, not that big, and a company called Spark Networks that owned JDate and Christian Mingle and a few other assets like that. That was really the extent of the online dating industry. There weren't all these players, and so we had a pretty limited pool of suitors that we could go after. And I had been, of course, wanted to sell the company to Match. That was my goal that was where I wanted my baby to end up, our baby to end up. And I had really struggled to get into that organization, to get to the right people and to really tell the story in a productive way. but had had a lot of success with the other two companies that were in the industry, and in fact had interest from both of them to acquire the business. And in fact, one had submitted a term sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And the way these term sheets work is there's usually a deadline by which the company says, okay, this term sheet is valid until X date, and by X date you need to sign the term sheet and agree to be acquired, or the term sheet just expires. And this day that we're talking about, this Friday in November, was this day of the expiration of the term sheet. And in retrospect, for the life of me, I don't know why I thought having a meeting with Match on that same day had any chance of being successful. I mean, in retrospect, if I had a founder tell me, oh, I have a term sheet due today, but don't worry, I have a meeting with another acquirer 4 hours earlier, I would laugh at that founder. I would be like, that is insane. But sure enough, and our office was on 39th Street, and the Match office was on 18th Street, if you know your Manhattan geography at all. So I dutifully, went down there, and I was convinced. I had my argument. I finally had the CEO. I was just going to sell the dream, and it was all going to be great. And I mean, if I rank like the worst 10 meetings of my life, that meeting is in the worst 10 meetings of my life. I mean, from the moment the meeting started, we just got off on
Right,
a bad foot. It was awkward. There was yelling, not by me, at me, at various points in the meeting. I mean, whatever you could possibly imagine, however badly you could possibly imagine a meeting going, this went that bad or worse.
This is the meeting with Match.
With the CEO of Match.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was your first, was this your first meeting with the CEO?
No, I had previous meetings there. Again, I'd been really trying to run a process really since the beginning of that year, for the better part of 2010. And so I had been in there before. I had met the CEO before. But I was really trying to drive them toward, I was really trying, we had the preliminary conversations, but we were at the point now where I was hoping they would be ready to submit a term sheet. So I wasn't there just for the first time. I mean, this is probably
Why did it turn into screaming? Like, how did it get off on the wrong foot?
Well, the person who was the CEO of Match at the time is notorious for screaming. So it's very easy to get there with this individual, who's now a very good friend of mine. But they were unhappy with some of the things we were blogging about. We had written some blogs that were not particularly flattering of the incumbents in the space. We had done some things with the product that he didn't like, and so he was just generally sharing his displeasure with our strategy and with our business. Mm-hmm. As much as he liked the business, he just didn't like what we were doing.
And do you walk into that meeting feeling kind of confident, like, I'm going to tell this person I have a term sheet? It's like kind of like, do you feel confident about that? Like you've got kind of like cards?
Yeah, I had a game plan. I was like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to tell them, this is the day that we've got the term sheet, and they need to move. And the meeting went so poorly, I didn't even tell them I had a term sheet. The hour went by, and I couldn't even get those words because the dynamics were such that it would have reeked of like desperation or it just wasn't right. Or at least to me, I couldn't get the words out because I was on defense the whole time. It was a confrontational, combative meeting. And I was like, what am I going to say after that lovely 45 minutes of yelling? Hey, would you like to really cement that, that love affair with a term sheet? Like, I just couldn't find the word. And so the hour comes and goes, and I leave. And I normally would take a cab, but I walked up the West Side Highway, 21 blocks, because I was just like, I just needed the space and the time to just, so many things were rushing through my head. It's like, what am I going to say to my co-founders who have, the way, and my co-founders are three of my best friends in the world, and we are very much a divide and conquer. You do your part, I do my part. There's tons of trust and respect. And they had entrusted me to do this, and to deliver an outcome. And I was like, what am I going to say to them? And then I was like, oh, I'm going to have to work for this company. We're going to have to sign this term sheet. I'm going to have to work there.
At the other one, you mean like, it's occurring to you that, like, because it didn't even come up and this meeting seems so poor, that the other sale is the only option, is what is like hitting you at that moment. Yeah.
Right. So I'm simultaneously like thinking about, I'm a failure. I've let my best friends and business partners and investors down, and simultaneously coming to grips with like, oh, like I'm going to have to fly to LA. Like just everything from the, like the details to like, this is like my next chapter of my life and my career will be at this other company.
Sam, can you pause on that for a little bit? When you said you're thinking you're a failure, you had a term sheet. And was it that it was so much emotion around the meeting you just walked out of that felt just icky and bad, or was the term sheet the
I
deal not
think to
attractive?
not be able to draw interest, to successfully draw interest from Match over the better part of a year for what I would argue was the most interesting asset. There aren't a lot of dating apps. There aren't a lot of dating sites out
It's a
there. Like there
smaller
just aren't.
space.
You can name them all, you know?
And it was so unique. It was so unique and took a really innovative approach.
And so like I was like,
so to fail
gosh,
to get an interest from the like leader,
it's like I should have been able to do something differently to have gotten them to want to buy us, you know?
So you're walking home. Go ahead.
And presumably, by the way, of course, more bidders means better price. So like, you know, we had a term sheet that we were willing to accept. It was a fine price.
But it's one,
But you know, there's also this feeling that like, not only did I fail just in the one instance of getting Match interested, I failed in the broader interest of maximizing the total interest and thus the total value in the company. Like I was literally walking to a board meeting and I was going to see my co-founders and then we were going to have a board meeting. So all of this, I had this finite 25-minute window to just like process everything.
And at this board meeting you're walking to, I'm assuming it's a board meeting where you're expected to make a final decision because it's
Correct.
your last day of this term sheet. So
Correct.
So you're walking to a very intense meeting.
Walking to an intense meeting where, you know, everyone is anticipating that I would bring back some news from Match. And so I would have to say that, no, we didn't. And that we would go through the process of, we were totally prepared to sign this other term sheet.
And so how does the rest of this day go? And is there any other things going on that are like affecting your mental state on this day? Like it's a Friday, you've got a weekend coming up. But because I'm imagining we're already in afternoon on this day, and somehow we all know that you end up selling to Match Group. Right. So the hours are dwindling here. How does the rest of this day go?
I mean, it's a generally busy time in my life. My wife is pregnant with our second kid, due about a month later, in early mid-December. And I've got a flight, you know, I'm taking the last flight out of LaGuardia as I normally do. So, you know, like a 9 o'clock flight. So I'm going to get home late. So this is all, but it's also not like, looming in any way. Cause it was like my life. Like it was just another Friday to be, you know, sort of on the road. And, you know, we were deep enough into the pregnancy and it was our second kid that, you know, it wasn't the most top of mind thing every moment, but it was definitely among all the chaos and craziness happening at work. It was in the context of there's a lot going on at home too, for sure.
Sam, for context for the listener, how many years in as CEO were you at that point of OKCupid?
Yeah, a long time, and maybe later we can get into like even why we were going down this sale path. But we had started the company in May of 2003, and this is November of 10, so 7 and change.
What I haven't heard from you yet is you talking about any feelings of exhaustion. And 7 years into my role as CEO, I was typed. And if you told me like I had the opportunity to sell, like there was some mixed feelings for sure, but I would have talked about the exhaustion. Why is that not coming up for you?
The reason we are selling in the first place is because of exhaustion.
Okay.
And so I think in this moment, if I'm thinking back to that day, that was adrenaline, not exhaustion. For those hours of sort of that day of ramping up for the meeting and then the like, oh my God, what am I about to, I have to go like, I was like dialed in to like, okay, I've got to go have these conversations. I've got to run a board meeting. I've got to return a term sheet. Like, and I've got to go catch a flight. Like that was very much like what I was doing. It is in the context of incredible exhaustion and frustration with the fact that the company's not doing as well as we want it to be. But at that moment, that's not what's top of mind.
Yeah, it's almost as though, and I went through one acquisition process so far myself, like it's almost as though that deal moment is re-energizing. It like pulls you back out for a second. But so help us finish this Friday. Do you sign this term sheet and then you end up not following through with it and something else happens, or do you end up not signing it or asking for more time? What do you do?
Yeah. So I get back to the office. I talk to my co-founders. They are disappointed, but very supportive. I mean, they're the way we all operate together is like there's no doubt that we're not doing our best, that we're not like
they don't drag you down.
Yeah. They're just like, look, hey,
okay,
you tried, let's get going. And so I'm starting to pull together the materials for the board meeting. And I get a text from my wife, Jessica. She says, hey, I'm having contractions. Get home as soon as you can. So I was like, okay. That's a wrinkle I wasn't planning for in this day. And very sort of, and this is not the first time she had contractions during her pregnancy. And in fact, to the point where I had shared this story with the CEO of the company that we're about to sign the term sheet with. And he had shared that his wife, he had shared a story where he had been on a plane to London, landed, literally had to get on the same plane coming back. So he and I had already sort of had a not a bond, but had a conversation about this. So I was like, oh shit. And so I texted the CEO and I was like, hey, this is what's happening. And he immediately was like, don't worry about our deadline. Like, take the weekend, go do the right thing. I was like, awesome. Canceled the board meeting and, just straight to LaGuardia, get on like the 6 o'clock. And of course, like the whole time I'm like, am I going to miss my kids, my kid's birth? And like, oh my, then talk about then the stress really starts coming because you're like, okay, these are things that I'm never going to live down. And of course the plane never flies fast enough when you need it to, land at O'Hare, pull out my phone, text my wife and she writes back, false alarm, all good. I'm fine. So, of course, I was like, deep breath.
She did you a solid. She got another weekend on the deal.
I know.
Was what I'm hearing. Yeah.
I know. So, I remember, I still remember, like, walking out of the jet bridge and just being like, then everything was really starting, to your point, Ryan, earlier, like, I was really so on adrenaline, that afternoon and of course I was like amped up on the flight that now it's like, okay, I'm now back into this. Now everything starts to hit me. I'm like, oh, I'm back in the real world now. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like mom and baby and wife are all fine. Oh, okay. Now I really have to figure out like, okay, we have this deal we've got to go deal with and whatever. And so I get home, go to sleep. The next morning, I wake up Saturday morning and I just had this like, not, epiphany is too strong of a word. I just had this like feeling. And I was like, I have to call the CEO of Match. His name is Greg. I was like, I have to call Greg. And I don't know. It's hard to even like go back and think like, what was the argument? Like, I don't even know why. But I remember I was sitting. We had an older kid, and I remember I was actually did the call in the nursery for some reason. I just vividly remember that was like the quietest place in the house. And I called Greg at like 9 a.m. on a Saturday or something like insanely early like that. At least he was on the East Coast, so maybe it was 10 his time. But
you didn't email him, you didn't text him, you just called him.
I called him.
And did you notify your co-founders, talk to investors, even talk to Jessica about this concept, or you just did it on your own?
No, I just called him.
Okay.
Did he yell at you again?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, actually, now in retrospect, as I think through the details, I suspect. While I don't vividly remember, I'm sure I would have. I'm sure I said to my co-founders and to Jess, "Hey, I'm just going to call Greg." Mm-hmm. But it wasn't a big thing. It was just like,
it wasn't a big plan. Yeah,
I'm going to do it. Yeah. And so I called him, and I said, hey, like yesterday's meeting didn't go how I wanted. I apologized for like whatever miscommunication or whatever had led to like that meeting not going well. And then I said to him, I was like, hey, we never actually got to the thing I wanted to say yesterday, which is that we have a term sheet we're going to sign to sell the company. And he literally goes, to somebody else? Like, obviously, because not his term sheet.
That's hilarious.
And like, I think he had rightfully so thought that, okay, if these guys are ever really going to sell, they're going to tell us. So I think I think in Match's mind, to the extent they wanted to buy us, which they did, I just think he was like, we have leverage as time goes by. So why are we going to lean in with the term sheet? We'll just wait until he tells us. Like,
if anything, it's almost like a little bit of a sign of affection potentially that he was like giving you such tough love.
I would say, if not affection, respect.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a weird way to show affection, to yell at somebody, but I do think the way, and now knowing how Greg operates,
respect
I do think
is a good word.
Yeah, I think there was like, some, and so he said to me, when are you going to sign this? And I said, well, we were going to sign yesterday, but we have till Monday. He goes, are you serious? And I was like, I'm calling you on a Saturday morning. Like, this would be like the weirdest bluff ever. I'm not that smart to pull off something like that. And he said, because if you're serious, I'll have my team work the weekend and we'll get you something on Monday. And I was like, if we get something from you on Monday, we will absolutely be able to consider it in time before we have to sign this other thing. I would later find out, I've become very good friends with the woman who ran Corp Dev for him. And she was having a girls' weekend in Vegas that weekend. So they were a couple hours behind. So she wakes up, as she tells the story, she wakes up to like a dozen emails from Greg.
Her story is not the same.
Yeah, you need her story. Yeah. So as her name is Stacy. And as she tells the story, she's like, I'm literally like took a vacation for the first time. Like, I'm with my girlfriends in Vegas, wake up at 8 a.m. Vegas time. And it's like, here's all this work you have to do urgently on this OKCupid deal. So like, anyway, we're really good friends to this day. And, but she like forever has like, you owe me a Vegas weekend. So anyway, so I'm like, all of a sudden, oh my God, I think he just said he's going to give us a term sheet on Monday. Like, I was like processing. I'm like, is that really what he's, because when I absolutely called my co-founders and they were like, wait, are you sure? Did he really say he's giving us a term sheet, or he might give us a term? And I was like, I wasn't listening closely enough, like to the exact words he used. I know he said term sheet Monday, but I was like, try or will.
Who's on the board? Sam, who's on the board at this point? Who is the board of directors of OKCupid?
The board of directors is 3 of the co-founders, Max and Chris and I, and 2 investors, Mac, who's one of our classmates, and this guy, Etienne, who graduated before us several years.
They were the 2 investors, you mean?
Yeah, they had the 2 investor seats.
Did you feel an obligation at this point to go to the board and get approval for what you were doing?
No, I think like I already had approval from the board to run a process and to solicit term sheets, and so I think I was still operating, sort of well within the expectation and in fact the direction of the board.
Yeah.
And after that call, do you feel like relieved, excited? Like, what's the emotion? Shocked. Yeah.
Because now it's starting to dawn on me. Wait a minute. I was like, wait, that's all it took to get a term sheet?
Yeah. Well, you did all the work leading up to it. Probably was this delicate balance, but something that I find really fascinating, and you've already touched on it by saying that M&A happens so infrequently in someone's career, sometimes 0 times, but then even if many, just a few times, that there's no muscle memory. And what you're describing in this process is how kind of capricious it can feel. Like potentially it's like the butterfly effect. Potentially all the little things you did is why that call went that way, and that there's 1,000 other versions where it doesn't. But I'm curious how it felt to you in that moment.
Well, and if Jessica doesn't have a false alarm, you have to sign.
No,
Yeah.
I know. It's even
Yeah,
to this day,
I
forget
know.
that too. To this day, like so many things in my life right now on, in 2023 have come from the fact that I spent that I sold the company. We sold the company to Match. Like,
yeah, that you took that call in a nursery. Yeah.
It's just like, it's like if I hadn't had Max and Chris as my roommates, in college. Like, there are these moments that are so random that have sort of left turn, right turn kind of like impacts on your life. And I don't know how to, even to this day, I don't know how to like even fully process those as like just luck, like, and it's just like,
But it's something that I'm hearing from you that I'd like to give you credit for, is like that I hear in other entrepreneurs I talk about that I really respect is in their story is there's a leave it on the field, to use a like sports analogy, kind of component, where there was a part of you that just thought, I'm just not going to sign without having told him, without having known for an absolute fact that he's a no. Like if he yelled in your ear, why are you calling me on Saturday? I don't care about your company. Like, click, you would know that he's out. You needed to know, is what I'm hearing a little bit from your story.
That's right. But then I was like, wait, how? But then I was like, how did I leave his office yesterday?
That's
like I was like, oh my God.
How old were you? If you don't mind me asking, how old were you during like that year?
2010, 33.
Okay, because like, I certainly don't ascribe everything to age. That's a dumb way of thinking. But it's like sometimes it's like, I don't know. And when I look back on my career, there's moments where I just go like, I don't know, like I can't explain my own behavior of like I sat in that meeting and I didn't do what I needed to do or something. So I don't know if you ascribe it to age or anything else. I don't know.
Yeah. Was it lack of confidence? I don't know. If we had signed that deal on that Friday, it would have been like negligent on my part to have not. I would have like had to fire myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it clearly means whatever.
It's like peering into the upside down. Like it's this unknown reality.
Yes.
But so here we are. I am curious how you do reject the other deal before we move into like what ends up happening.
Actually, sorry, before we get there though, Sam, when you were thinking about which deal, like if you had gotten a term sheet, was anything running through your head about, this guy just screamed at me for an hour? What is the premium that I need to be paid to go work for this guy?
Yeah, it's a great one.
Greg and I had probably met 4 or 5 times, and I had built a relationship with some of the other people on his team, and I came to believe it was not a yelling out of anger, but a yelling out of intensity. Mm-hmm. Like it's a stylistic thing. There would later be articles written about it. Just that like he's just a loud man, and like he would always, as I got to know him, he'd say, "I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling near you." Like that's just like
I've never heard
he's that. Like I never heard it either. But like literally, he's so animated and he gets so into whatever he's talking about, and it's, I don't know. And so I had
processed it.
I had come to like be able to say, okay, in general, he's a rigorous thinker, and actually like he and I, again, we ended up having a great relationship together because to me, I want someone who I understand how they're thinking. Like what's hardest for me is this capricious, someone just decides, I don't really have a good explanation for why, but we're just going to turn left here. And you're like, okay. I mean, okay, I get you can make that decision, but like, it seems random to me. Whereas with Greg, everything he does is like he's a litigator by training. Like he is a lawyer. And so
there's everything.
And so I came to appreciate that, and working to the extent I was going to be working under like someone who thinks critically and structured, was, I think, something I could live with. And I'm not easily intimidatable. Like if someone wants to yell at me or near me, it doesn't really bother me.
So, and Greg, at that time is holding the title like CEO Match Group, which is a title you come to hold at some point. So I'm curious. So there's another transition, but we haven't quite gotten there. But I'm just like, at that moment, he's a CEO.
He is. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So look, we worked the weekend. They not surprisingly, this woman Stacy, who woke up in Vegas and we ruined her weekend. She had a number of diligence questions. So we were, we go back and forth that weekend over, I think all over email, but whatever, and through the day on Monday, and then sure enough, they do get to a term sheet on Monday.
You hadn't indicated any of the terms from the other deal. You hadn't told them the price. They come in at a new price. Is the price a premium below the other one?
I'm trying to think about their first offer. Their first offer was close enough, close enough to the other one. And remember, this was our preferred buyer. So even there's a discount we would have taken to sell to Match over the other one. Mostly because, by the way, we all wanted OKCupid to end up somewhere that we thought it would live forever. Like one of the things I take pride in is less how much a company I started sold for, but more like the fact that SparkNotes today is still relevant 24 years after we started it. Like we built something that had durable value. It wasn't the biggest company ever. It was a quite small company, but it was durable. And I wanted OKCupid to live in a company that was committed to the industry indefinitely. And that's and Match, of course, to this day is still the market leader, but I knew they weren't going anywhere. And that's one of the reasons we cared a lot about it. And so they were close enough to the other offer that we felt comfortable turning down the term sheet on Monday, even before we had a signed deal with Match.
Because it seemed to be trending. But that's still like, it's another thing that's easy to say now, us all knowing the deal happens, but that was a risk and probably stressful at the time, where you're just living these very adrenaline filled days. Like that's another one where when you turn it down, you don't know, a deal is never done till the money is wired and you're in your new role, etc. So, you're making some risky choices on those days.
Yeah. And Ryan, to your point, like, that was a lot of conversation with co-founders, board, Jess, like that, that was not something that was just like, oh, we're going to tell these, rip up this term sheet. Like that was a, highly discussed conversation and decision.
When you called the first company to say no, you called their CEO?
Yeah.
Can you share, what were you feeling at that moment and how did that conversation go?
I felt like he was on the other side of the butterfly, flapping its wings. Like this was, I don't like the word fair, but this was somehow, he got the short end of that stick, because if this, in the 99.9% of world out, simulations where Jess doesn't have contractions on Friday, like he gets this deal done, and so
he didn't question your integrity during that moment. He didn't question whether or not it all happened.
He was professional.
Yeah. And I just said, hey, like, he asked about, my wife, and I said, hey, everything turned out fine. And I just said, we've made a decision to, we're not going to sign the term sheet. We're going to go in a different direction. He was not happy. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but he also didn't berate me or in any way say, oh, that was a ruse or anything like that. And I didn't even go into detail like, oh, we got the offer over the weekend. I just said we're going a different direction. So, he
doesn't know how long. He doesn't need the additional color that this all happened in the last 24 hours or something.
He may have thought that, had the board meeting happened on Friday, we might have chosen to go a different direction there. Yeah. So I think had he had the play-by-play, he might have, well, I don't think he'd be more upset. But anyway, he had no reason to think there was like anything nefarious going on. So that was a short, simple, and in the scheme of things, straightforward conversation, as it turned out.
So something you've touched on a couple times, but I think now is good to zoom out, and feel free to share any details about how the Match deal kind of ultimately goes and whatnot. But you mentioned the lead up to even deciding to sell, like some of the psychology, the timeline, you're years and years into this. Like I'd love to learn more, like how long, like help us understand the timeline, like how long is the build to some of that exhaustion? What is it like with your co-founders and exec team where ultimately you decide, you know what, selling this is best? Like, because I think that listeners, and I know myself included, that is a very non-obvious choice. The some, I'll even call it dogma a little bit in Silicon Valley, is you never stop. Like including, which ironically sometimes even includes M&A. Like you never even consider selling. Like you just keep going, like no matter what. So I'd like to unpack your decision to even decide to run a process. What brought you there?
Yes. So I think, it's informed by a couple things. I think the first thing is, as I said earlier, we had started this company called Spark Notes, and we got very lucky.
Same co-founders.
Okay. Same co-founders. And we had sold that company in less than a year after starting it. We got exceptionally lucky. And so we had this great outcome in a year. And so I'm not saying we thought it was always going to be that easy, but the one data point we had was a very lucky, fast data point. And so we started the company in 2003. And, this is, again, there's not even mobile phones, or there's not even smartphones. And certainly there's no like APIs and cloud. Like we leased servers and data centers. Like it took us a year to launch a product, like things that are like, you tell founders that now, they're like, oh, I could build OKCupid in like 4 days, or whatever. And they're like, no, it took us like a year. And so like things generally took longer then. God, I sound old when I say that. And so we started the company in 2003. We raised a very small amount of seed money, mostly from the founders. We put in $600,000 in 2003. And then we raised about $6 million in 2006. And that was all the money we raised. And here's what happens. We raised the money, and, we had dreams of growth and scale and all the things that founders dream about. And I'll spare all the gory details, but basically 2007, 2008, 2009, we were growing, but very linearly, not exponential, not anything. Like we were growing like a fine, like if we were a industrial company, you'd be like, great, you're growing your revenue, but like we were not a venture growth. We're not growing like a venture backed company should grow. And I said earlier in our conversation, like we have immense trust and respect for each other. Like the four of us are, I think, each really good at what, especially myself excluded, the three of them are just like truly, truly brilliant people. And so there was no one ever was like, oh, you suck at your job or you are failing. It was all like the things we are doing aren't working. Okay. And, we used to have breakfast every morning at Dunkin' Donuts. Like I still remember exactly what we would order. Like it was like the same. We were such good friends, and we'd stay at work till really late hours, and it was everything to us. And we would have like, the four of us just had one conversation that went on for like 6 years. It was like that kind of, closeness. But by the end of 2010, like we started disagreeing more. Again, none of it was like you suck, I suck. It was like, we were starting to have more and more friction about how to change the trajectory of the business. And when things are going well, it's easy to agree. You're like, oh, keep doing that. Do more of that. But when things aren't going well, you have to, there's a diagnosis, and then there's like come up with a solution. And smart, reasonable people can disagree, especially smart, reasonable people probably can disagree on what to do. And so we started, the conversation started getting less and less fun. Our friendship started getting, less and less close. Maybe that's not even true. I don't think our
maybe
friendship
belabored. Like it's like there's a dragnet on the energy of it, which is that this thing is not working the way that you all want it to.
Correct. And it gets so bad that the 2010 holiday party, I tried to boycott because I didn't want to be in the same room.
We don't want to have fun together anymore.
Well, it was the whole company, right? And I was like, I don't want to be in the same room with Chris. Chris was like chief product officer.
Yep.
OKCupid was his idea. Like he singularly gets credit for us being in this business. So and I was like, I can't be in the same room with Chris right now. And Max was like, we can't have a holiday party without the CEO. Like that will look stupid. And I was like, okay,
fine.
So I had just planned to like not be in New York that day, but I went in for the holiday. And I remember it was like in this basement. We didn't have a lot of money. Anyway, we had it. It was fine. I left this, like I came at the last minute. I like left at the earliest possible time. I was like, I got to get out of here. And then we had a meeting in January because we were all like, okay, this isn't working. And we had an offsite at our lawyer's office. Note to listeners, do not have offsites at your lawyer's office.
Never heard of that.
No, terrible idea.
That sounds supremely unfun.
I know. I so imagine we're at this like oversized like table, in this like drearily, beige room. And we basically are like, okay, let's spend the next year effectively what we called skeleton mode, which was basically like, let's all plan let's all go find our successors in the organization. The company was break even. So like there was no need to sell. So we were just like, look, let's all hire or promote our successors. We'll all leave the company at the end of the year. And if it grows like this for a decade, maybe in 2020, we'll have a business that's worth something.
So that was your resolution, is to liberate yourselves. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe going in a similar direction, liberate all of the four of you at once, or was a consideration, actually, maybe we need to get rid of one or two of us?
I think we never contemplated that we wouldn't all be in or out together.
It's kind of unique that you considered it. Yeah, you considered it that way. I have heard many stories where a couple people are feeling like they want out and one person is not, or one person wants to run it. Like I've heard there being a more uneven application of that logic. So that does strike me as unique.
Yeah, I think you're the first person to ever ask me that question. And I don't remember that ever coming up. I think it's for two reasons. I think one, it's our friendship. I think a lot of the joy, again, at that moment, we weren't loving every second, but I think in part, a big reason we loved the job was each other. And two, I don't think I've ever seen a group of founders with more complementary, non-overlapping skill sets, meaning like what the four of us each did, I think the other would be not that great at. And so I think there would have been like a massive rebuild or, like it just would have been a big, heavy lift to, for two people to replace two people. And I just think there wasn't a lot of appetite for that.
Something's interesting to me, Sam, about like the kind of kitchen cabinet you have around you at this moment in time. If you had had a board, I know Mac, friends, we went to school, the three of us went to school together, great guy, not a traditional venture capitalist. I don't know the other board member that you mentioned, but it strikes me that if you had had traditional venture capitalists on your board, they would have fought like hell to keep you in your seat and to say, okay, you got to issue with Chris. That's fine. Let's replace Chris because you know what, Sam, I've got this really experienced ex-COO of Match who left last year, and we can pull her in, and she's going to be amazing. Something like that. But in absence of those voices on you, you go a different route.
It's an interesting set of pros and cons. I think in terms of who you have on your board, and I talk to founders all the time about this, like who you take money from and who you put on your board have consequences that are like very hard to know ahead of time, but can be like, like one of our board members, Etienne, who you don't know, I remember him saying, "Why are we selling the Ferrari?" He had some analogies like, "We just put the engine in the Ferrari. Why are we selling it now?" Or he's some analogy like that. Like, but he was a small investor. Mm-hmm. He wasn't gonna like lay on the tracks. Whereas I think a professional VC, I think, would have been, and by the way, maybe for better or for worse, might have pushed a lot harder on us to either sort out our dynamics, or there were things we could have done in the bit. We could have done different things. We could have made different business decisions that, in fact, there were a couple of business decisions we intentionally did not execute, that we executed only after we got acquired, that ended up being very positive. So there were a number of things that a different board might have pushed on that could have led to a different, better, worse outcome.
I really like decoupling kind of like the inputs from the outputs. And sometimes you got great inputs and the outputs don't work out, and it is what it is. Sometimes it's really lousy inputs and it works out, and that's luck. In this case, are you happy with the inputs in this process?
I think if I put myself in that moment and don't benefit myself from what ends up happening down the road, I think we had mostly good enough inputs. I do think had we had a seasoned operator, mm-hmm. someone who had built businesses, had gone through some of the things we had gone through, who we all respected, mm-hmm. I think that voice was probably missing.
And when you're sitting around a table with your four, arguably some of your best friends in the world and co-founders in this business, and you're all talking about leaving, I'm interested in the intersection of, or just people's digestion of, failure feelings. Do you feel any, if you didn't feel failure, feel free to push back, but do you feel failure feelings, and are they like, I'm a bad entrepreneur, I should have been able to make this work? Or are they, this one didn't just turn out, I'm a serial entrepreneur, I want to go on to build the next thing, that's the whole reason we're discussing leaving? Like, how are you digesting this decision that like all of a sudden you need to all abandon ship, you know?
Oh yeah, no, it's very much couched in failure. You know, I think one of the things as a founder, I think your name is like inextricably bound with the company mm-hmm. that you started, in a way that, like, if you just work at McKinsey, like, no one confuses that you're McKinsey or McKinsey is you or whatever,
sure.
or Google or whatever. Whereas SparkNotes, OKCupid are the four of us.
Yeah.
And the four of us are almost those companies, you know, and so I think it's very hard to disaggregate your company's failure from your own as a co-founder. I think it's just very hard. The world probably doesn't care. I mean, who cares why a company that you don't know failed? Like, but I think you as the founder, I think it's, and I mean, the things that I have been a part of that have failed, I feel very responsible, and I replay in my mind like what happened. Like, yeah, it's, and I remember a walk I went on with Jess. I was in Boston. I'm on year 5 of commuting every week, and now, to her credit, she was like, "Can you just sell OkCupid for like $1 and come back home?" Like, she was not like, for her it wasn't financial. For her it was like, mm-hmm. I get it if you're doing this because you're loving it and it's a thing you're passionate about and are building. But like, if it's not going to work, why are you leaving home every week? Mm-hmm. Like, that was her argument. It wasn't like,
it's an intense question.
Yeah. In fact, this one walk we went on, we were strolling our daughter. She, like, I remember saying, what number would you be okay with me selling OkCupid for? And her number was so low. It was like less than the amount of investment we had. Like, we would have made no money. It was below the preference,
Yeah.
It was like a number less than $6 million. And I was like, okay, but then we wouldn't get anything. And she's like, yeah, but then you'd come home, So like but in some ways that's even a harder pressure, like, because it's,
Totally.
it's not the money.
How did you interpret that, Sam?
When she
I was
said that, like as
she's sending a message there.
she's definitely sending a message. I remember being both sad, like, wow, I'm a shitty husband, that like you just don't even care. Like it's that my absence is what you care about, not the outcome. I was also, I don't really get mad. I was also like annoyed because I was like, and Justin and I think have different views on money. I think she could care less about money, and I, as a practical matter, think a certain amount of money allows a lot of other things to happen. And so I found her being so dismissive of the economics, to be almost like a moral high horse, but like impractical. Like the money does matter, especially at that point in our lives.
You talked about it being a failure. Can you help me understand that? And I'm not, look, at that point, how many users did it have?
We probably had, single digit millions.
It's growing, single digit millions users. It's not Facebook in 2010. I understand that. But to call it a failure, what do you mean by that?
I mean, and again, this all gets back to like, sort of what company you're trying to build and who you raise money from and what you like. But we had pitched a vision of a business that looked very different from what we were delivering. We had pitched a business with tens of millions of users, with tens of millions of dollars of revenue, that was the biggest dating site at the time, app, in the world. Like we had pitched it. This was gonna be a winner take all market. We were gonna like take it all. And there was an economic component to the kind of returns we wanted to deliver our investors. And look, I get people invest in startups eyes wide open. They understand loss of capital is a thing, but like, I don't want to lose other people's money.
Of course.
And again, it's less about like that investment. Did they know they were going to or not? But it's also like, well, if we lose these people's money, how am I going to raise money for my next company? Like they might not invest again, like this it's one of those like success breeds success things. And it's like, okay, well, if we don't have an outcome that's commensurate with what their expectations are, then what does this mean for us ever raising money? Like there's all these like,
it's existential for you as an entrepreneur, and the measuring stick is all successful companies ever, and being a leader in your field. And at that time, it's not but I don't know if this is where you're going, Ryan, but I think that something that is fascinating is the people such as yourself on this call that end up achieving so much in their career that just thousands and millions of other people actually end up knowing about those companies and looking up to them, have moments in their career where they feel like they're an utter failure. It's an interesting phenomena almost, like you felt that way when objectively many things are working. To reorient us in time, if I may, this moment where you're feeling failure is now how close in calendar time, assuming we all do know how this turns out, to when you end up selling to Match. So like how much calendar time between I'm a failure to I'm actually selling to the category leader? What are we dealing with?
So I think January of 2010 is this offsite at the lawyer's office, when it's like we really commit to breaking up the band. Like we are now going down a path of this thing of us not working together a year from now. And so 2010 is that year where each one of us had like a work stream is the wrong word. Each one of us had like a set of things we were going to do to try to either maximize value or set up the business for other leadership or whatever. But we each left that meeting with like a specific set of things we were going to do. And it was all in the service of preparing for the businesses to exist without us. So that was probably like, I think the two lowest points for me were that the the holiday party that I tried to boycott, and this meeting at the, like, those two like pictures in my mind are like the two low points.
So holiday party in a basement, offsite in a lawyer's office. These are two things not to
Don't do those.
And they're a couple months apart.
Yeah, December and January. They're very close in time.
Yeah.
Did you ask Chris to go on a walk during that time period? Did you guys go get a meal?
We definitely spent one-on-one time together. I don't remember a conversation. We definitely sorted out, like, in some ways the decision to break up the band took all the pressure off the
Alleviates
friendship.
it.
Yeah. So like that is the release valve, is like, we have this untenable situation, but is only untenable in the event that there's no clear path out. Like, I think when people, like, when you can see the finish line,
even if the finish line isn't what you want, there's a relief.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like anything. It's like that too long plane flight you're on. You're like, okay, well, we're in descent. You're like, okay, fine. I'm like, we're landing. Like, I'm going to be off soon. Like, you can start to like look and know that you're going to get out of this thing.
Because the mutual respect in your friendship still existed, but
totally,
it just was like in a broken state because of the business wasn't the way.
100%. So I think Ryan, like, the four of us kept having breakfast and whatever. I just couldn't be at that holiday party and like pretend to be like, whatever, best friends still.
This story ends in such an extraordinary way, and I want to get back to that in a second. But if you kind of, you have been a VC for a couple of years, you've acted as a venture capitalist. If you had a similar situation now where you're the board member, you're the investor board member, or an independent board member, and a similar situation's happening, what advice would you give? Or what advice would you have given Sam, in early 2010? Anything that you think that group should have done differently?
I think we probably were not nearly as transparent. We probably kept everything a little too close to the vest. Meaning, I don't think any of us had mentors that we, and whether they're board members or not, I think in general we were a pretty insular group.
From each other or from the outside world?
No, from the outside world. Meaning, like, I just don't think we had access to people who could help us put everything in perspective, could help us say, hey, I've been through this before. And I think that's where, 80+% of the advice and counsel I give founders has nothing to do with business strategy or how to run OKRs or do whatever. It's about like leadership, managing stakeholders, tough conversations, perspective. Like those are the things that I find I can add the most value to founders today. And I think it's the thing we were sorely lacking in retrospect.
Does the word, I'm going to use an extreme word, does the word shame, did it enter into this period of time for you at all? With the holiday party, and I'll use myself instead of you, like, I remember situations where I was not feeling excited about my own company, and I would feel shame about that, or have trouble showing up to a company event knowing that I was supposed to be the cheerleader and I was not bringing that cheerleader energy. You tell me your version, because I don't want to put it in your mouth.
Yeah, but I mean, I think shame is like very close. It's like very adjacent to like the feeling of failure. So I think, it was less internally actually. Like I think most people in the company thought we were doing fine. Like no one thought we were doing great. But I think to like, to your point,
It wasn't depressing or something.
Yeah, and I think to the point you both made, like their objective, like people were still going out in the world saying they worked for OKCupid and getting hugs at bars,
That's cool.
so it was still like it was a cool enough thing to be doing, and especially because of the category we're in and the fact that especially in Manhattan we were probably the largest or second largest dating app in Manhattan. So like there were plenty of positive signal to the rank and file employee for sure. And so I think like I didn't have any trouble like showing up and looking someone in the eye and saying you should still work. I've seen environments where like founders have to like convince employees to stay because people are like, why am I on this stinking ship? That there wasn't that feeling, but I do think like, what am I going to say to my investors? What am I going to say to Jess? What am I going to say to like my parents? Like those things. How am I going to sort this out in my career? That's where failure, shame, I think we're closer and more present.
Remind me the date then of like when the Match deal ends up being real. Like again, I'm trying to connect the calendar of how long it sits in this state before you are in this completely other world.
I mean, it takes probably, and I don't remember the exact date. It probably takes us. Oh, well, I do remember because I was in the delivery room when I was negotiating. I literally was on the phone with Greg. I was on the phone with Greg in the delivery room when he finally was like, "You have to stop talking to me," and he hung up because he's like, "You have to go talk to your wife." So it was at least through the 24th of November. I think we signed the term sheet like the first week of December, if I remember correctly. So it's probably 2 weeks of like term sheet limbo, and then I think as anyone who has done a deal knows, a term sheet is just a term sheet. And we closed January 20 something. And so there's then
you've got like a 2-month-old at home.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly a 2-month-old. Yeah. So there's probably 6 to 8 weeks of negotiating the deal. And I always say every deal, has 3 deaths. Yeah. And so sure enough, there were 2 or 3 times when we were like, I remember I was actually took a call with Greg. I take calls with Greg in the weirdest places now that I'm saying it out loud.
A nursery.
So in my nursery, in the delivery room, and at my parents' condo, I took a call with Greg when he said words that are infamous to my co-founders. He said, he was so mad at me. He said, "I can't see. I have flames in my eyelids." At the top of
and this is before the deal is finalized. He said that to you.
This is between term sheet.
Oh my gosh!
What was he mad about?
I don't even remember now. But I remember that phrase. I'm like, flames in your eyelids. That's really a weird image for someone to share.
I have to know in a moment where the new acquirer is saying I have flames in my eyelids. Do you have any flashbacks to turning down the other deal and feeling like, oh my gosh? Did I?
No. For whatever reason.
Like you knew it was going to go through in your heart of hearts.
I was very committed and confident that this was the right direction.
That's impressive.
What's he saying to you is your role at that point? What are you negotiating for your role going forward?
Oh, so the way the deal very quickly moved into an upfront payment and a 1-year earnout.
Okay.
And so I was gonna be the CEO of OKCupid, run as a wholly owned and as independent as possible subsidiary of Match.
Okay, and you were happy with that?
Yeah, that was the best we could ask for. And anyway, we
sorry, no, I do kind of want to skip a couple steps here now, and because somehow it goes from this to you being the CEO of Match. And to me, when I just was like reading a bunch of articles, digesting a bunch of information about your career, and it strikes me as unique. Like there's just if I do 10 interviews with entrepreneurs who have their company acquired, I get 9 or 10 stories where the relationship after that sours quickly. They're unhappy. And I get not one, but you're the one story where someone ends up as the CEO of the new company. I think there's probably some aspects of IAC and their strategy, leading into that being the situation. But we're talking about this guy with flames in his eyelids, and all of a sudden you get his job. Like we just need to connect the dots here of how that happens.
Yeah. So what happens is literally, after we signed the term sheet and before we closed the deal, Greg gets promoted to be the CEO of IAC, replacing Barry Diller. And he leaves the CEO of Match role open.
Okay.
And to this day, I've never actually had a conversation with him about what was he thinking in that moment, leaving it open. But so for a full 18 months, 5 of us, the 4 people who ran the major business units at Match and the CFO, all independently report to the CEO of IAC directly. There is no CEO of Match.
Okay.
From January of 11 to September of 22, that role is left open.
Okay.
You must be thinking to yourself, this is not a healthy situation.
You know what's even maybe worse than that? I barely noticed or cared. meaning, I think if I'd spent more time in corporate America, I would realize that this is insane to have the biggest business unit of IAC
like CEO
leaderless.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like, I'm just doing my thing. I'm just the CEO of OKCupid. And honestly, not having a CEO of Match is better for me because I know Greg. I have my deal with Greg.
Yeah.
And like the last thing I want is some new person coming in and being my boss. That sounds terrible. It crossed my mind zero times that I would be the CEO because A, I'm leaving. B, my org is 37 people out of 1,000. Like
didn't occur to you.
Zero times. And so I was just like, look, I report to Greg. He does all the things. I get everything I need from this structure and situation, and I'm out of here in a year. So
there wasn't a Succession style like lobbying for that role.
Oh. In retrospect, once I got offered the job, then I realized, and then the other four people all quit.
Yep.
Oh.
And then I was like, there was something. And then I was like, oh, no wonder everyone always like wanted my vote because there were like these 2 people always agreed and 2 people always agreed, and everyone like cared about my opinion on things. And I was like, why? There'd be like these totally random things about the company that the other 4 people would like call me and ask my opinion on. I'm like, why? And I totally was. I like Ryan. I'm sure you think I'm like you. I did not know. I was like heads down running my. We had an earnout. We had almost half the value of our deal was in the earnout. So I was just like heads down, earn the money.
And the earnout was in cash. It was not in stock.
It was in cash. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I have to ask a question. I'm gonna ask it in an ironic way. You are running OKCupid for years and years. You are exhausted. You've run a marathon. The acquisition is a finish line strip. Your nearly dead body falls across that line. Then you stand up, and I'm assuming that after that, people are just piling on refreshments. Your life is easy and nice. It's a joking way. I'm joking. Like what is it like after acquisition, and how do you deal with the fact that you've already expended all your energy?
Oh, yeah, but it was so, I mean, to have gotten the outcome we got when the alternative was either in the January lawyer's office or even that other term sheet. I mean, this term sheet was like, we made 2-3 times more money on this deal, at least, than on the other one.
Refreshed.
And so we're pinching ourselves.
Okay.
This was like victory out of the jaws of defeat type thing, you know? So
but you don't get to go take 3 months off or something. Just kind of telling the human side, like an acquisition isn't this magical unicorn. You don't get like time off or something. So like, you're pinching yourself because it's great and you pulled this thing off, but are you okay just jumping back in and running it? Like,
here's the thing. The outcome was so good. Our friendship was like, we're like hugging and high fives. And there's something about a 1-year earnout. There's something about a 1-year earnout that is magical. Like so unnatural as to be like, it's like a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
They're like, we had one goal to hit. It was just like in fact, I had a shirt printed with the profit level we had to hit.
Oh my gosh.
I almost remember it, but there's one digit I remember. And I walked into my first meeting with Greg, and I had
wearing the shirt,
the profit number, 6,900,000, whatever thousand. And he was like, oh, you're going to hit the number, aren't you? I'm like, we're so going to hit the number. Don't even worry about it.
But in hindsight, that's when you got the CEO job of Match.
Maybe, yeah.
That's when he was like, this dude is going to hit his numbers. Noted.
Yeah. And so like we had like plans. We were like, it was so short term. And you know, as you guys know, you've built startups, like you never have one goal. You have 10 goals.
Oh, and you're like, and then there's like an 11th and a 12th that piles in. Yeah.
And here we had we were funded, like we had resources. I mean, we were like,
so it really did feel that way. I'm just checking whether it was like a false sense of that or what it sounds genuine. Like you're genuinely refreshed by all of this.
It was that year, I think 2011, if not the most fun year we had, was close.
That's awesome.
Sam, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but it struck me when you said that the four of them quit. That was, I can imagine there's a lot of emotions around that for you. So you get named, can you just walk us through that? You get named CEO, and then what happens to the team around you?
I get named CEO, and by the way, I've never had an executive assistant in my life. Just to show you, like I didn't even know, and I got like assigned an executive assistant that morning. Like I got the corner office that morning. Like,
is this when you get the CEO of Match role? I'm just double checking. Okay.
Yeah. We get the CEO of Match role, and it's not like everybody quits that day, but in the next between September and April, all four of the business leaders that were my peers quit, and another 5 of the next 7 or 8 most senior people in the company quit. And you want to talk about feeling like, I guess not a failure, but talk about questioning your confidence. Like basically everyone is saying this guy's a freaking moron. Like that's how I read it.
What keeps you sane at that point? Are you starting to go to a management coach? Are you talking with some mentors? Are you talking with Greg?
So I wish I had a coach. I have, since 2016, I've had an executive coach, and I just didn't know that was a thing. I probably wasn't self-aware enough to know I needed one, but whatever. I should have had a coach then. I did not. Greg was incredibly supportive. I think Greg knew the Game of Thrones that was happening. I think, like, in fact, I remember calling him to telling him about one person's departure, and he got on video, and before I even could say the words, because the executive had also told him, he said, the hits just keep on coming. Like before I even, and I think he knew. He's like, look, here are 4 people, all of whom have more tenure than Sam. They're older than Sam. They have more corporate pedigree than Sam. And I'm telling them all to report to Sam.
Yeah.
Like, I think he knew in retro, I think he knew at the time they were all going to leave.
But so in a way, he sees something in you, that is really special. And ultimately, just to get this out there for people listening, you go on, and take the company public. This is just this trajectory that is really incredible. But but at each step, it's the largest company you've run. And you go way beyond your 1-year earnout with OKCupid and the kind of obligations that you thought you had to this organization when you started. So that's just, I don't know, there's a lot of unique things that occur in that period. And would you say that you and Greg have a unique relationship and that sort of fuels you through?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes to the relationship we had. I also think, at that moment in time, the Match business was plateauing. Mm-hmm. They did not have a mobile. This is 2012. They didn't have a mobile app. They were still called Match.com. Mm-hmm. Like I think Greg realized that he needed someone that would be more shake it up more versus business as usual. This is like a wartime, peacetime thing, I think, where I think he's like, if I want the peacetime CEO, if things are just going great, I think he picks one of the other 4. But I think he's like, we got to figure out the next act for this company. Mm-hmm. And he didn't know we were going to start Tinder or whatever. But it turns out, given that we launched Tinder, I would argue that having a founder entrepreneur in that seat, being able to appreciate what Tinder was, work with the Tinder team, and build Tinder into what help build Tinder into what it became. I think it ended like that was a very lucky, obviously, happening. But I think he correctly diagnosed. I'd rather have someone who is going to shake things up, bring a different perspective, be innovative, change the culture, versus, hey, here's an exec who's been here for 6 years or 2 years or 1 year, whatever, who has this corporate pedigree, who will kind of maintain us down this path.
And he sees this in, I'm curious, okay, so he sees this in you because because he's empowering you into these roles and whatnot. But, this, something we haven't touched on yet, is that this industry deals with people's romance, deals with people's personal lives, is not without controversy. There's been a lot of controversy over some of these companies. People either think Tinder and some of these companies are an amazing idea or ruining society. I mean, people have all these extremely polarizing opinions. Then there's a lot of things that happen, interestingly, with Tinder, and the CEO of that is like quite a personality. So I guess what I'm getting to is, what is it about, you're talking about your pregnant wife, and you're having, little kids, and you're family oriented and all this stuff, but what is it about your personality that allows you to succeed and lead in this industry, which I guess I'm painting from the outside is like quite controversial, and like the decisions are non-obvious, and I don't know, what makes you a great wartime kind of executive? Like, try to diagnose yourself.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think on the sort of on the industry side, I think it's so many people come into the dating category out of their own frustration and their own beliefs about dating. We came at it as 4 Harvard math majors, so we looked at this really as like an engineering product problem. And so I think often you can bring your own highly idiosyncratic needs to a product. And I think we never did that. We were like, just what's the right product to build? I think in terms of the wartime thing, I think founders in particular have to be there's so much sobriety. I think, like, yes, you always are selling the dream, but internally, that it's either deliver the result or die. Like you will be run out of money. And so I think there's like an ability to make maybe tougher decisions more quickly, because you're just like, I don't have time for the like. And by the way, this was a little bit, there was one thing I tried to get done that I failed at getting done because I didn't get enough internal buy-in and blah, blah, blah. I was just like, this is the right decision. Let's go do it. And I didn't have enough support internally. And so we didn't get that done. But I do think like making decisions, looking at data sort of dispassionately and just saying like, we have to do the right decision here. We agreed to pay, to launch an app. We decided to launch an app and pay Apple 30% of our, to this day, no company has made more money. If you look at the online dating industry, Match has made the most money, and then Apple has made the second most money off online dating, just from their 30% take on our apps, and we decided to do that, and we decided to do it in one meeting. Like, it was the previous management team debated for years, and we were like, we're just going to do it. We're going to drop the .com from Match.com. Like, that was a decision I was like, I had to line out. It was one of the most controversial decisions I made. I had to line out literally people outside of my office being like, you can't do that.
I'm curious what you are hearing, Ryan, because I'm like, as a different brain hearing the same information, but what I'm hearing is you kept your inner entrepreneurial, like super pragmatism alive through becoming an executive at a large company that ultimately went public.
Which I think is only possible because I was the CEO and I had a supportive chairman. Like, I think in a world where you're like the COO and your CEO is like a corporate person, I think that probably gets beaten out of you. But like, there was no one to stop me.
That helps. Yeah.
You had built the trust in the relationship with Greg ahead of time.
I know it's so easy when you're listening to other people's stories to oversimplify or draw weird conclusions, but one really fascinating takeaway from me here is that this relationship with this person who kind of reams you out on a Friday, and that you call on a Saturday, but who is really a tangential person in your story, ends up becoming a really strong partnership. And together, there's public companies created, and billions of dollars in enterprise value. I just want to use, billions with a B, of dollars of enterprise value created, and then millions and millions of people finding, their romantic partners and all sorts of stuff. So it's like it's just a powerful reminder of the power of individual relationships in business, even as companies scale. For me, that's just something that from this episode, I find really powerful. And that's not to take any value away from your relationship with your co-founders and how special that was. But there's just this, like, sometimes just this one-on-one, like, two people get a lot done, is an incredible thing to remember.
Yeah. And I might even take it a step further, which is like almost all of the important things that happened in this story are relationship driven.
Yeah.
It was the founder relationship that, pushed us down a certain path. It was then the relationship I built with Greg. It was like a lot of this stuff that is.
And the relationship you had with Jessica.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
if you don't want to get on the plane, there are some husbands that would not have gotten on that plane. It's a month early. It's probably a false alarm. You signed that thing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on with us today, Sam. And, and truly, like, not just lip service, like, it is just so easy when you're a doer. Like, just hearing you talk, like, you're just a doer. You just get things done. You love to build things. You love to do things. That it's like water to you. You're a fish. You're swimming in the water. The world is the water. You're getting things done. But that is, it's actually just so rare. And that's why we love to have people like yourself on the podcast, because everyone else in the world who aspires to do things, it's just so helpful to actually hear how the people who do things talk and how they really think about it, because it's so easy to imagine it and imagine that someone sat down and they made a really complicated business plan, and like and then lightning struck them and they had an idea, and like just they don't actually realize that the real life of it is just, you get up in the morning, you do more stuff. You get up in the morning, you do more stuff. You find another person who inspires you. You ask them to work with you. Like, the real doing is it's just every day you do it.
It's every day putting one foot in front of the other. And and if you just do it enough days.
So that is what I really love about your story and your willingness to share it.
Oh, thank you.
Sam, I really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable throughout it, and like talk about when you didn't have the answer, and talk about some mistakes, and especially just some of the feelings you had throughout it. So thank you so much for opening up about that.
Yeah, that's fun.
We really appreciate your time too. I know that for someone who does spend a lot of time doing things and whatnot, it's not always easy to carve out time. So just appreciative of that as well. And thanks for Ryan for reaching out to you. I know that
thank you. I'm just excited I made the cut. I'm excited to I'm excited to both hear this, but also I'm excited to be a podcast listener now.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
My friend,
have a good rest of your day. Okay.